The Missouri Highway Patrol issued an intelligence report warning local Missouri law enforcement to keep an eye on radical organizations, and those included the Constitution Party.
Several of those named in the two reports are veterans, former law enforcement officials, politicians, and even a couple of Fox News personalities. These are interspersed with a handful of independent journalists, including film producer Gary Franchi and militia members. In their spring 2010 intelligence report, the Southern Poverty Law Center claimed to have identified 512 patriot groups. The report states that being categorized as a patriot group doesn't make them an advocate of violence or hate, yet the Southern Poverty Law Center, a group of self-confessed national hate watchers, was quick to claim these groups are anti-government extremists. Founded by Morris Dees and Joseph Levin in 1971 for the purposes of ensuring the rights of minorities, the Southern Poverty Law Center claims to be an organization dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry and to seeking justice for the most vulnerable members of society. What would the Southern Poverty Law Center hope to gain by naming and profiling individuals in their Meet the Patriot report? Top-ranked Baldwin, Franchi, and others wonder about the possibility that the Southern Poverty Law Center is a front organization for Big Brother. These patriots are in the forefront, fighting for this nation's constitutional rights. The Southern Poverty Law Center seems bent on demonizing any American citizen or group who feels that the federal government is not adhering to this country's ultimate law, the Constitution.
That FEMA, for instance, is running a secret series of concentration camps in order to imprison Americans, or that President Obama is secretly planning re-education camps for our children. Those kinds of ideas, certainly not in all cases, but in some percentage of cases, drive people to feel that they have to defend their kind of freedoms, their liberty, at the point of a gun.
The Southern Poverty Law Center labels patriots as people who generally believe that the federal government is an evil entity that is engaged in a secret conspiracy to impose martial law.
Specifically, where do you get proof, aside from some isolated incidents, that this is a growing trend across the country?
Sure, fair enough question. I don't think it's at all isolated. We've got not only reports, all kinds of evidence of these groups actually doing training in the woods as they did back in the 90s.
Completely overlooked by the Southern Poverty Law Center is information published in an article in the now-defunct Radar magazine. In the article, the last roundup is government compiling a secret list of citizens to detain under martial law. Christopher Ketchum reports that the continuity of government program encompasses national emergency plans that would trigger the takeover of the country by extra constitutional forces. In short, it's a roadmap for martial law. No one knows very much about the continuity of government program. Representative and Homeland Security Committee Chairman Benny Thompson and committee member Pete DeFazio sought to review the documents, but were denied, pressing DeFazio to go public, stating, "Maybe the people who think there's a conspiracy out there are right." Ketchum also talks about MainCore, a database that a knowledgeable source says contains information on 8 million Americans. Specifically, Ketchum quotes his source as saying, "The database can identify and locate perceived enemies of the state almost instantaneously. In the event of a national emergency, these people could be subject to everything from heightened surveillance and tracking to direct questioning and possibly even detention." Resurgent patriots understand that the definition of a national emergency remains rather vague. According to Department of Defense documents and past executive orders, it could be as simple as riots or natural disasters, to the more complex insurrections or nationwide opposition to a U.S. military invasion overseas. Resurgent patriots are also concerned with the warrantless electronic surveillance and spying programs, during which the federal government bypassed existing laws to data mine the communications of American citizens on U.S. soil. This information, along with information from other sources, gives the so-called resurgent patriots and patriot groups credibility, plausible reason for concern, and paints a sinister picture of the Southern Poverty Law Center, an organization out not to protect the most vulnerable members of society, but to suppress, degrade, and list anyone who openly questions the federal government's actions.
Another controversial report and more damage control from the Department of Homeland Security. The same department that issued a report suggesting returning war veterans were susceptible to extremist groups, also issuing what it calls the, quote, domestic extremism lexicon, end quote. It's like a dictionary with definitions for various extremist or terrorist groups and some definitions. Here's an entry: anti-immigration extremism. The Department of Homeland Security's definition: people who are, quote, highly critical of the U.S. government's response to illegal immigration and oppose government programs that are designed to extend rights to illegal aliens, such as driver's licenses and in-state tuition. Here's another one: single-issue extremist groups. According to the DHS dictionary, there are individuals who focus on a single cause, such as animal rights or the environment. They are also described as special interest extremists.
But the reality is the Department of Homeland Security is supposed to be defending us against another attack from Islamic terrorism. That's the reason this department was created. And yet it appears to be the gang that can't shoot straight. And also, to me, it's missing its purpose. You went through all those different definitions of different types of extremists. Nowhere in that dictionary do you see the term Islamic extremist.
It came to light last week that the state of Pennsylvania paid an Israeli-based company, the Institute of Terrorism Research and Response, $125,000 to compose a list of opponents of gas drilling and tax protesters to fulfill the State Department of Homeland Security federal mandate. When the matter was brought to the attention of Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, he claimed to be appalled and embarrassed that his office was tracking and circulating information about legitimate protests. At a press conference, he made this declaration: "Let me make this as clear as I can make it. Protesting against an idea, a principle, a process is not a real threat against infrastructure. Protesting is a God-given American right, a right that is in our Constitution, a right that is fundamental to all we believe in as Americans." Well, unless, of course, you were protesting against the G20 in the governor's state last year.
I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly. I order all those assembled to immediately disperse.
I think whenever you begin to look at what took place under the regime of Adolf Hitler, what took place under Mao's China and Stalin's Russia, and on, the pattern of before you can persecute a people, before you can incarcerate large numbers of people, you have to marginalize them. You have to create the image that these people are dangerous to society, or they're extremists or radicals, call them what you will, but marginalize them from the mainstream of society, so that at that point the rest of society will accept the persecution that might result upon this group.
In June 2010, enemy of the Constitution-loving Americans and MSNBC's Hardball host Chris Matthews did a piece on the Tea Party movement, Oath Keepers, Alex Jones, militias, birthers, and other patriot groups, referring to them as the New Right. He says this new movement grew from a group having mere political differences with the left to a group enraged at the Obama administration, considering the federal government an occupying force rather than a legitimate administration, and seems to harbor class and racial resentment. Matthews is also concerned with, as he puts it, their need for their Second Amendment rights. Matthews takes great offense to the adoption of the Gadsden flag as the symbol of the group, saying it scares him. In an interview about his documentary, Rise of the New Right, Matthews points out that there were even congressmen and congresswomen on the balcony of the Capitol building, waving the Gadsden flag and inciting the crowd to protest the federal government. In the documentary, he takes his opportunity to point out the common thread running through these new writers, a fear that their personal rights are being threatened, their dislike of our nation's economic situation, government overspending, the huge national debt, and their dislike of what they see as America becoming. Matthews seems to forget that in the United States of America, we do have the right to be distressed, question authority, protest egregious acts committed by the federal government, and yes, to be armed.
FEMA has been given the authority to declare martial law wherever they are deployed. And that is a very powerful authority, in that, as you should know, when martial law is declared, that your constitutional rights are dismissed.
New questions tonight about an Army combat brigade being trained to deal with civil disturbances in the United States. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 generally prohibits federal uniformed services from carrying out domestic law enforcement duties, except in cases expressly authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress. Critics say the brigade's training goes against one of the founding principles of our country, separation of military and civilian government.
They've spent 30 months on the streets of Baghdad. Now the 1st Brigade Combat Team of the Army's 3rd Infantry Division is back in the USA. The Army Times reporting, quote, they may be called upon to help with civil unrest and crowd control or to deal with potentially horrific scenarios, end quote.
May be called upon to help with civil unrest and crowd control.
The question arises, why? And isn't that what the National Guard does?
Infantry Brigade is designed to engage an enemy with maximum effective force and destroy it. That's not the sort of thing anybody wants to see in the streets of the United States.
Almost 5,000 strong, the brigade is based at Fort Stewart, Georgia, under control of Northern Command.
One of its specialties is counterinsurgency. This is a radical departure from separation of civilian law enforcement and military authority, and could, quite possibly, represent a violation of law.
Historically, the posting is unusual. In modern history, Army troops have been used at extraordinary junctures. Under the first President Bush to contain the 1992 riots in Los Angeles, under President Lyndon Johnson in response to Detroit's 1967 riots, and in the grips of a depression by President Herbert Hoover to contain Army veterans demanding their bonuses.
The United States of America were generally isolationists during World War II. Wanting to gain citizen support to get involved in the war, Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCollum drafted his 8-action memo in October 1940, the purpose of which was to provoke a Japanese attack against the United States, causing U.S. citizens to demand entry into the war. The actions caused the desired effect, resulting in the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. In March 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff drafted a plan to create public support for a war with Cuba. Operation Northwoods called for the CIA and other such groups to carry out terroristic attacks against U.S. bases and cities and implicating Cuba by planting false evidence. According to the records, the plans were never implemented, but they do bear a striking resemblance to the attacks of September the 11th, 2001. The official account of the September 11th attacks has been the source of ongoing debate for more than 9 years. The video and photographic evidence does not support the official story.
That was not American Airlines! That was not an American Airlines!
Former Florida Senator Bob Graham stated that there was information that had not been made available to the public for which there are specific, tangible, credible answers, and that the cover-up led to the heart of the administration. The crisis of September the 11th saw a major shift in security and other legislation and has nearly single-handedly brought about the end of privacy in the United States. USA Patriot Acts 1 and 2 intruded on no less than 5 of the first 10 Bill of Rights. The John Warner Defense Act saw the end of Posse Comitatus. The Military Commissions Act saw the end of habeas corpus, and the Real ID Act attached to an emergency appropriations bill passed with virtually no debate.